The Adventure of the Veiled Lodger by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. When one considers that Mr. Sherlock Holmes was in practice for some 23 years, and that for 17 of those I was his co-worker and the chronicler of his deeds, it becomes evident that the volume of material at my disposal is immense. My problem has never been the scarcity of records, but rather the selection thereof. I possess a vast array of yearbooks, which serve as a peerless resource for those studying not only the crimes, but the social scandals of English society toward the end of Queen Victoria's reign. Let it be said, however, that the authors of those agonizing letters, pleading for the protection of their family honor or the reputation of the afflicted, have nothing to fear. The discretion and profound sense of professional duty which always characterized my friend remain in full force as I prepare these memoirs for the press. I must, nevertheless, issue a stern warning to certain parties who have recently attempted to gain access to these papers for the purpose of destroying them. The source of these outrages is known. Should they be repeated, I am authorized by Mr. Holmes to declare that the whole story concerning a certain politician, the lighthouse, and the trained cormorant shall be given to the public. There is at least one reader who will understand exactly what that entails. Naturally, not every case provided Holmes with the opportunity to display that remarkable gift of intuition and observation which I endeavor to capture in these pages. At times he had to struggle to reap the fruits of his labor. At others, they fell unbidden into his hands. Yet even the simplest cases in his practice were often interwoven with the most harrowing of human tragedies. It is one such tragedy that I wish to recount now. I have slightly altered the names and locations, but in all other respects, the facts remain unchanged. One morning, it was in early 1896. I received a hurried note from Holmes requesting my assistance. As was his custom, I found him seated in a room thick with tobacco smoke. Facing him in the armchair sat an elderly, motherly woman of the cheerful landlady type. "This is Mrs. Marilow of South Brixton," my friend said, accompanying his words with a wave of the hand. "Mrs. Marilow has no objection to tobacco smoke. Watson, should you wish to indulge in your own untidy habit. She has an interesting story to tell us, which may lead to a sequence of events where your presence could prove most useful. Anything I can do. You will understand, Mrs. Marilow, that if I am to visit Mrs. Ronder, I should prefer to have a witness. Pray make that clear to her before we arrive." "Lord bless you, Mr. Holmes," cried our visitor. "She is so eager to see you that you could bring the whole parish with you, for all she cares. In that case, we shall come directly after noon. Before we set out, let us verify our facts once more to help Dr. Watson grasp the situation. You say that Mrs. Ronder has been your lodger for 7 years, and that you have seen her face but once." "And I wish to God I had never seen it," said Mrs. Marilow. "I gather it was terribly disfigured." "Oh, Mr. Holmes, you would hardly take it for a face at all. That is how it looked. Our milkman caught a glimpse of her once, as she was peeping out an upper window, and he dropped his conso. The milk splashed all over the garden path. And when I saw her, I happened to catch her unawares. She covered herself quickly and said, 'Well, Mrs. Marilow, now at last you know why I never lift my veil.'" "Do you know anything of her past?" "Nothing at all, sir." "Did she provide any information when she first arrived?" "No, sir, but she provided good coin, a great deal of it. She laid the rent for a quarter year down on the table in advance and didn't haggle for a penny. In these times, a poor woman like myself cannot afford to turn away such luck." "Did she say why she chose your house?" "My house stands back from the road, and is more secluded than the others. Besides, I have no family of my own and no other lodgers. I remember she had tried other places, but found mine suited her best. She craves privacy, and she is willing to pay well for it. You say she has never once shown her face in all this time, save for that one accident. It is a remarkable story, most curious, and I am not at all surprised that you wish to have it cleared up. I don't wish it at all, Mr. Holmes. I am perfectly content as long as I get my rent. You could not have a quieter lodger, nor one who gives less trouble than she does. Then what has given the matter a new turn? Her health, Mr. Holmes. She is wasting away, it seems, and there is something terrible on her mind. Murder, she cries, murder. And once I heard her shriek, "You cruel beast! You monster!" It was in the dead of night, and her voice rang so shrill through the house that it made my flesh creep. I went to her in the morning. "Mrs. Ronder," I said, "if there is something troubling your soul, there is the clergy and there is the police. Between them you may find help." "For God's sake, not the police!" she cried. "The clergy cannot change what is past. And yet," she said, "it would ease my mind if someone knew the truth before I died." "Well," I answered, "if you won't have the authorities, there is this Mr. Holmes we read about." "Begging your pardon, Mr. Holmes." She fairly jumped at that. "That is the man," she cried. "I wonder I never thought of it before. Bring him here, Mrs. Marilow, and if he is reluctant to come, tell him I am the wife of Ronder, the showman. Tell him that, and give him the name of Abbas Parva. Here it is, just as she wrote it, Abbas Parva. That will bring him," she said, "if he is the man I take him for." "And it will," Holmes remarked. "Very good, Mrs. Marilow. I should like a little chat with Dr. Watson. You may expect us at your house in Brixton about 3 o'clock. Our visitor had no sooner waddled from a room, for no other verb could describe Mrs. Marilow's gait, than Sherlock Holmes fell with fierce energy upon a pile of commonplace books in the corner. For some minutes there was a constant rustle of leaves, until at last, with a grunt of satisfaction, he found what he sought. So excited was he that he remained seated upon the floor like some strange Buddha, his legs crossed, and the great volume open upon his knees. This case worried me even then. Watson, here is the proof. My own marginal notes. I confess I am at a loss. I am convinced, however, that the coroner is wrong. Have you no recollection of the Abbas Parva tragedy? None, Holmes, and yet you were with me then. But, to be sure, my own impression was very superficial, for there was no clear lead, and no one sought my professional services. Perhaps you would care to look over the press cuttings? Could you not give me the essentials? Quite easily. It will come back to your mind as I tell it. Ronder, of course, was the name of the proprietor. He was a rival of Wumwell and of Sanger, and one of the greatest showmen of his day. There was evidence, however, that he had taken to drink, and that both he and his show were on the decline at the time of the tragedy. The caravan had halted for the night at Abbas Parva, a small village in Berkshire, when this horror occurred. They were on their way to Wimbledon, traveling by road, and they had simply encamped, without any intention of giving a performance, as the place was so small that it would not have paid for the opening. Among their attractions, they had a magnificent North African lion, known as the King of Sahara. Both Ronder and his wife were in the habit of performing inside the cage with the beast. You can see a photograph of the act here. It is enough to show you that Ronder was a huge, porcine individual, while his wife was a most remarkable and handsome woman. It was sworn at the inquest that the lion had shown some threatening signs, but as is often the case, familiarity had bred a certain contempt for danger, and no heed was paid to the matter. It was their custom for either Ronder or his wife to feed the lion at night. Sometimes they went together, sometimes alone, but they never allowed anyone else to do it, for they believed that as long as they were the bringers of food, the beast would look upon them as benefactors and never harm them. On that particular night, 7 years ago, they went together, and then occurred the hideous tragedy, the details of which have never been fully cleared up. It seems that the whole camp was aroused about midnight by the roaring of the beast and the screams of the woman. Various grooms and employees rushed from their tents, lanterns in hand, and the light fell upon a terrible scene. 10 yards from the cage, which was open, lay Ronder with the back of his head crushed and deep claw marks across his scalp. Beside the cage door lay Mrs. Ronder upon her back, with the creature crouching over her and snarling. He had so torn her face that it was never thought she could live. Several circus hands, led by a strong man named Leonardo and Griggs the clown, drove the beast off with poles, and he leaped back into the cage and was instantly secured. How he had broken loose remained a mystery. It was conjectured that the pair had intended to enter the cage, but that as the door was opened, the beast had sprung out upon them. There was no other point of interest in the evidence, save that the woman in her mad agony kept screaming, "Coward! Coward!" as she was carried back to the van in which they lived. It was 6 months before she was fit to give evidence, but the inquest was duly held and the verdict was one of death by misadventure. What other explanation could be suggested? You may well say so. And yet there were 1 or 2 points which puzzled young Edmonds of the Berkshire Constabulary. A smart lad. He was sent to Allahabad later. It was through him that I first heard of the case, for he dropped in here and smoked a pipe or 2 over it. A thin, yellow-haired man? Exactly. I was sure you would pick up the thread. But what puzzled him? We were both puzzled. It was devilish difficult to reconstruct the affair. Look at it from the lion's point of view. He is set free. What does he do? He takes half a dozen bounds forward, which brings him to Ronder. Ronder turns to fly. The claw marks were on the back of his head, but the lion strikes him down. Then, instead of leaping on and escaping, he turns back to the woman, who was close to the cage, and he pulls her down and mangles her face. Then, again, those cries of hers would seem to imply her husband had failed her in some way. But what could the poor devil have done to help her? Do you see the difficulty? Quite. And then there was another thing. It comes back to me now as I think it over. There was some evidence that, just at the time the lion roared and the woman screamed, a man began to shout in terror. That was Ronder, no doubt. Well, if his skull was smashed in, he could hardly be expected to do much shouting. At least 2 witnesses spoke of the cries of a man being mingled with those of the woman. I should think the whole camp was shouting by that time. As to the other points, I think I could suggest a solution. I should be glad to hear it. They were both together 10 yards from the cage when the lion got loose. The man turned and was struck down. The woman's idea was to get into the cage and shut the door. It was her only refuge. She made for it, and just as she reached it, the creature sprang after her and overthrew her. She was angry with her husband for having incited the beast's rage by his flight. If they had faced it together, they might have cowed it. Hence her cries of "Coward! Dazzling Watson!" And yet, there is but one small flaw in your diamond. What flaw is that, Holmes? How could the creature be at large at all, if they were both 10 yards away from the cage? Perhaps some enemy had let it out. But why should it attack them so savagely if it was accustomed to performing all sorts of tricks with them inside the cage? Perhaps that same enemy had done something to incense it. Holmes sat in silence for a few moments, lost in thought. In favor of your theory, Watson, there is this. Ronder was a man who had many enemies. According to Edmonds, he was a terrible brute when in his cups. A fearful bully, he would shower everyone with abuse and strike anyone who crossed his path. I imagine that those cries of monster mentioned by our visitor were night echoes of the dear departed. However, our speculations are of little value until we have all the facts in our possession. There is cold partridge and a bottle of Montrachet in the sideboard. Let us renew our strength before we call it into service. When our driver set us down before Mrs. Marilow's house, we found that stout lady blocking the open door of her modest and secluded dwelling with her ample frame. It was clear that her chief concern was not to lose her valuable lodger. Before taking us upstairs, she implored us not to say or do anything that might lead to such an undesirable end. Having reassured her, we followed her up a steep, shabbily carpeted stair and entered the room of the mysterious tenant. It was a narrow and, as might have been expected, musty, ill-ventilated chamber, for its inhabitant rarely left it. This woman had kept beasts in captivity, and now, by some strange retribution of fate, she was a caged beast herself. She sat now in a broken armchair in a dark corner of the room. Long years of inactivity had coarsened the lines of her figure, which had once, evidently, been beautiful. A heavy dark veil covered her face, but it was cut away across the line of her upper lip, leaving visible a mouth of perfect shape and a delicately rounded chin. I could easily imagine that she had indeed once been a very handsome woman. Her voice, too, was harmonious and pleasing. "Your name is not strange to me, Mr. Holmes," she said. "I thought it would bring you here." "It has done so, madam, though I do not know how you are aware that I was interested in your case. I learned it when I was questioned after my recovery by a county constabulary agent, Mr. Edmonds. I fear that I lied to him. Perhaps it would have been wiser had I told him the whole truth. It is always wiser to tell the truth. But why did you lie to him?" "Because the fate of another person depended upon it. I know that he was a very unworthy person, but still I did not wish his ruin to lie upon my conscience. We were so close, so close. But has that impediment been removed?" "Yes, sir. The person I have in mind is now dead." "Then why, in that case, do you not tell the police all that you know?" "There is another person to be considered. That other person is myself. I could not face the scandal and the publicity which a police inquiry would involve. I have not long to live, and I wish to die undisturbed. And yet I desired to find a discreet and just man to whom I could tell my terrible story, so that it might be understood after I am gone. You flatter me, madam, but at the same time I am a responsible person. I do not promise you that, after your story, I may not myself consider it my duty to place the matter in the hands of the police. I do not think so, Mr. Holmes. I know your character and your methods too well, for I have followed your work for some years. Reading is the only pleasure fate has left me, and I miss very little of what goes on in the world. But, in any case, I will take the risk of whatever use you may make of my tragedy. The telling of it will ease my soul, my friend, and I shall be glad to hear it." The woman rose and took from a drawer the photograph of a man. He was unmistakably a professional acrobat, a man of magnificent physique, posed with his muscular arms folded across a swelling chest and a smile lurking beneath a thick mustache. The self-satisfied smile of a man who has achieved many conquests. "That is Leonardo," she said. "Leonardo the strong man, who gave evidence at the inquest." "The same. And this is my husband." It was a loathsome face, a pig, or rather a wild boar in human form, a face terrifying in its animality. One could easily imagine that foul mouth gnashing and foaming in rage, and those small, vicious eyes darting looks of malice at all around them. Villain, bully, and brute, all were written plain upon that coarse, flattened face. These two pictures will help you understand the whole story. I was a poor circus girl, raised on the sawdust of the arena, jumping through hoops before I was 10 years old. When I became a woman, this man loved me, if lust can ever be called love. In short, on one ill-fated day, I became his wife, and from that moment, I entered hell, where he was the devil who tormented me. There was not a soul in our circus who did not know how he treated me. He deserted me for other women. He cowed me into submission and lashed me with his riding whip when I complained. They all felt pity for me and hated my husband. But what could they do? They feared him to a man, for he was always terrible in his cups. He was constantly fined for brawling and for cruelty to the beasts, but he had plenty of money and cared nothing for the fines. All our best workers left us, and the show began to decline. Only Leonardo and I held it together, along with the clown, little Jimmy Griggs. Poor soul, he had little enough to be merry about, but he did his best to keep the show from falling apart. Then Leonardo began to come more and more into my life. You see what he was like in appearance. Now I know what a wretched spirit was housed in that splendid body, but then compared to my husband, he seemed like the archangel Gabriel. He pitied me and helped me, until at last our friendship turned to love, a deep, deep, passionate love, the kind I had dreamed of but never hoped to feel. My husband suspected us, but I believe he was as much a coward as he was a bully, and Leonardo was the only man he feared. He took his revenge in his own way, by tormenting me more than ever before. One night my cries brought Leonardo to the door of our van. On that night, we were close to tragedy. My husband could no longer be allowed to live. We plotted to kill him. Leonardo had a clever, inventive brain. It was he who planned it all. I do not say this to blame him, for I was ready to walk every step of the way with him, but I would never have had the wit to conceive such a scheme. We fashioned a club. Leonardo made it, and into its leaded end he fixed 5 long steel nails, points outward, at the exact distance of a lion's claws. This club was intended to deal the death blow to my husband, while creating the impression that it was the work of the lion accidentally set free. It was a night as black as pitch when I and my husband, according to our custom, went down to feed the beast. We carried the raw meat in a zinc pail. Leonardo was waiting for us behind the corner of the big van, which we had to pass before reaching the cage. He was a moment too late, and we had passed him before he could strike, but he followed us noiselessly, and I heard the thud as the club crashed into my husband's skull. At that sound, my heart leaped with joy. I sprang forward and drew back the bolt that secured the door of the lion's cage. It was then that the terrible thing happened. You may have heard how quickly these creatures scent the blood of a human being. Some strange instinct must have told the creature in that instant that a human life had been taken. As I slipped past the bars of the door, he sprang out and was upon me in a flash. Leonardo could have saved me. Had he rushed forward and struck the beast with his club, he might have frightened it off, but his courage failed him. I heard him shriek with terror, and then I saw him turn and run. In the same moment, the lion's teeth sank into my face. Its hot, foul breath seemed to poison me, and I was barely conscious from the pain. I tried to push away those great, steaming, blood-stained paws with my bare hands, screaming for help. I was aware that the camp was in an uproar, and then I have a dim memory of several men, Leonardo, Griggs, and others, dragging me from beneath the creature's claws. That was my last memory, Mr. Holmes, for many weary months. When I came to myself and saw my reflection in the glass, I cursed that lion. Oh, how I cursed him! Not because he had taken my beauty, but because he had not taken my life. I had but one desire, Mr. Holmes, and enough money to carry it out. I wished to hide myself so that no one might ever see my poor face, and to settle where none of those I had formerly known could ever find me. A wretched, mangled beast crawling into its lair to die. That was my end. We sat in silence for a while after the unhappy woman had told her story. Then Holmes leaned forward and patted Mrs. Ronder's hand with a show of sympathy which he was seldom seen to exhibit. "Poor girl," he said, "poor girl. But what became of the man, Leonardo? I never saw him again, nor heard of him. Perhaps I was wrong to feel such bitterness toward him. He could sooner have loved one of the monstrosities we carried about the country than what was left of me after the lion's attack. But a woman's love does not pass so easily. He left me in the claws of the beast. He abandoned me in my bitter need, and yet I could not bring myself to send him to the gallows. As for myself, I cared nothing for what might happen. What could be more terrible than my present life? But I stood between Leonardo and his fate. Is he dead? He was drowned last month near Margate. I read of his death in the papers. And what did he do with that club with the 5 claws, which is the most ingenious and remarkable part of the whole story? I cannot tell you, Mr. Holmes. Near the camp there was a chalk pit with a deep, overgrown pool at the bottom. Perhaps in the depths of that pool. Perhaps. It matters little now. The case is closed. Yes, said the woman. The case is closed. We had risen to leave, but there was something in the woman's voice which arrested Holmes's attention. He turned swiftly toward her. Your life is not your own, he said. Keep your hands off it. What use is it to anyone? How can you tell? The example of patient suffering. The woman's answer was terrible. She raised her veil and, stepping forward into the light, she said, I wonder if you are able to endure it. It was a ghastly sight. No words can describe the framework of a face when the face itself is gone. The bright and beautiful hazel eyes, looking sadly out from that hideous ruin, made the spectacle all the more horrific. Holmes raised his hand in a gesture of pity and protest, and together we walked in silence from the room.